The scent of the moon. Apollo astronauts describe the lunar scent July 18, 2019. The smell of the moon is characteristic. Ask any Apollo lunar explorer about the olfactory nature of the lunar dirt and you'll get the same answer. The scent of the moon. Apollo astronauts describe the scent of the moon. Lunar walk. Apollo 16 collecting ground. NASA. With NASA's 6 Apollo lunar landing missions between 1969 and the end of 1972, a total of 12 astronauts dusted off the moon, becoming an elite group that would later be labeled the Dusty Dozen. Something like the Dusty Dozen from the modest 2.5-hour lunar walk of Apollo 11 to incursions totaling just over 22 hours outside an Apollo 17 spacecraft. NASA's Apollo landing crews couldn't escape bringing lunar material into their ships. Landing decades later, those who walked the moon and lunar scientists are still trying to figure out exactly what caused the scent of the moon to astronauts' noses. That fresh scent of lunar regolith. Harrison Ack Schmitt of Apollo 17, an astronaut scientist who walked the surface of the moon in December 1972, said, "All I can say is that everyone's instant impression of the smell was of burning gunpowder. Not that it was metallic or acre. The smell of burning gunpowder was probably much more implanted in our memories than other comparable odors." Schmitt said he believed that all who walked on the moon agreed and commented at the time that when they took off their helmets, the fresh regolith, the scientific name of the lunar dirt, smelled of gunpowder consumed. Schmitt said, "For what it's worth, I've always suspected that olfactory sensors were reacting to a variety of electron bonds, as one might expect with both the thrown gunpowder and the newly introduced lunar dust in the cabin." By the way, the time to start repressurizing from the lunar module? My first comment on gunpowder was almost exactly 7 minutes. Mucous membranes in space. The scent of the moon. Apollo astronauts describe the lunar scent. One last man to set foot on the moon, Jack Schmitt of Apollo 17, one of 12 humans to make the journey. NASA. Larry Taylor, director of the Institute of Planetary Geosciences at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, agrees with Schmitt. He served at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston during the Apollo 17 mission, and was one of those who directly advised astronauts on the moon as they walked through the lunar landscape. Taylor said, "When the whole subject of the smell of dust came up several years ago, I explained what the astronauts were smelling, that is, what their mucous membranes felt, were highly activated dust particles with hanging links." Taylor said that when a geologist crushes a rock here on Earth, that person will feel some odor generated by the crushing of minerals, thus creating so-called pendant bonds. But on the moon, the hanging ties may exist for a long time. And since lunar rock and soil are composed of approximately 43% oxygen, most of these unsatisfied bonds come from oxygen. He told Space.com: "In short, I believe that all astronauts sniffed unanswered links hanging in the lunar dust, which were promptly met in a second by the lunar module's atmosphere, or moisture from the nose's membrane." Grip the specimen. Apollo 11 lunar module pilot Buzz Aldrin also resembles the scent of the moon. When he and Armstrong re-entered and repressurized the Lunar Eagle module, their outfits and equipment became soiled by the lunar dust. "This dust has a definite odor," he reported. Aldrin said, "It was like charcoal burned, or like the ashes that are in a fireplace, especially if you sprinkle some water on them." Aldrin also noticed another episode of lunar dust on the Apollo 11 mission. Before leaving Earth, the lunar dust was considered by some alarmists as very dangerous. In fact, pyrophoric, capable of spontaneously igniting in the air. The fact that the lunar dust had been so remote from contact with oxygen, as soon as we repressurized our lunar module booth, it could start to heat, burn, even blaze away. At least that was the concern of some. A July fireworks show on the moon was not advisable. So, Aldrin and Armstrong did an ad hoc test of lunar dust. They did so using a so-called claw sample, a lunar sample quickly collected by Armstrong and hidden in a spacesuit pocket in case there was a problem that would force the astronauts to hurry out of the scene. This specimen was placed on the flat top of the cylindrical engine cover of the Eagle's climb. And as the cabin began to fill with air, both Armstrong and Aldrin waited to see if the lunar sample would in fact smoke and burn. Aldrin said, "If that happened, we would stop pressurizing, open the hatch and throw it out." But nothing happened. We returned to the matter of preparing for the departure of the moon. The smell of the moon. Apollo astronauts described the lunar aroma too. At the end of the Apollo 17 mission in December 1972, lunar suits and space helmets were covered in lunar dust. NASA. Reactive lunar nature. It was Thomas Gold, a professor of astronomy at Cornell University, who died in 2004, who first signaled the explosive potential of the moon rock, said Donald Bogard, a member of the Lunar Planetary Institute in Houston, Texas. From 1971 until his retirement from NASA in 2010, Bogard was a principal investigator on NASA's lunar and meteorite research programs and was a member of the scientific team that conducted quarantine testing of the Apollo lunar samples between 1969 and 1971. Bogard said, "Tommy Gold was partially correct when he warned NASA, prior to Apollo 11, that the lunar dust carried to the lunar module could spontaneously combust and produce a safety problem. I was summoned to a JSC meeting before Apollo 11 to discuss this possibility." Gold had perceived the likely reactive nature of the surfaces of lunar material, but had overemphasized its reactive effects.